Alright, we are back with a new video, and to wrap up our coverage of Celebrity Big Brother 3, we will be doing a player ranking all 11 players based on the games that they played on this season. And this was a weird list to put together because, as I've alluded to in the past, I don't think many of these people were playing that actively hard. I feel like a lot of people just weren't taking this experience seriously, and through that sort of makes this an interesting list to put together, but I'm going to do my best. Now, like I said, there are 11 players, and I'm going to be ranking them based on their games, but let's not waste any more time. Let's get right into the list. So starting with the list at number 11, and it was sort of close between these two players. However, I decided to go with the person that was evicted earlier, and here we have Teddi Mellencamp. And yeah, she was the first boot on the season. Mind you, I don't think she played actively bad to be that first boot. However, she is part of that day one alliance with Carson. Like, she really builds that solid bond with Carson and Cynthia to the point where they become a trio. And actually, that's the main reason that she becomes targeted, where Miesha decides that grouping is too big of a threat, and she decides to target Teddi as a way of weakening that group. Like, not really too much that Teddi did actively wrong, aside from making herself that expendable. And obviously, we saw her during the HOH try to make a deal with Miesha to not be put up on the block, only for Miesha to outright reject her, which probably wasn't the best sign on Misha's part, but we'll get to that later. And like I said, I feel like Teddi didn't do that much wrong, but at the end of the day, she was the first boot, and even if she had survived the first round, I feel like that with Miesha and Toddrick, as long as they were on the HOH side, that they would probably want to weaken the Carson side, and through that, Teddi was the most expendable person there. So because of that, I have her here at number 11. Now we're moving on to number 10, and again, I debated between this person and Teddi, but at number 10, we have the second boot of the season. We have Mirai Nagasu, and it was tough for me because I really do like Mirai. She is a fan of the show, and I really wanted her to do well despite my reservations, but she really had a hard time clicking with this cast. She was by far the youngest person on there, and I feel like that really harmed her ability to build social bonds. That, and also the fact that she comes from a radically different background than the others, with her being an Olympic figure skater, so she didn't really have that many options coming into the house. And I also feel like through that, she was probably less integral to her alliance than Teddi was. I feel like while she was a part of the Athletes Alliance, she was sort of on the bottom there, and like Teddi was the most expendable person there. But the reason I have her above Teddi is, one, she did survive one more eviction than her, but two, I feel like Mirai got very unlucky with the second HOH, with Kirkpatrick winning it, and obviously Kirkpatrick was one of the few people that wanted to target her. Now obviously there was some drama that happened between those two during the first round that caused Kirkpatrick to want to go after her, and that's sort of bad on Mirai's end, but I feel like if under most other HOHs, she probably wouldn't have been the second target unless Kirkpatrick was really pushing for it. But I feel like with Kirkpatrick winning the second HOH, it put her in a very bad spot, which allowed her to become the second boot as a result. So like Teddi, I feel like she didn't do that much actively wrong to be voted out, aside from being not super well positioned in the house. And I feel like there was less that Mirai could really do to build those bonds. And I guess through that, you could say that Mirai probably had less potential in the game. But I also feel like that with the say of the house, she had less people that were willing to target her early on. It's just that she got unlucky in that she had one of the few people that were willing to target her winning HOH early on that caused her to become the second boot. So because of that, I decided to have her slightly higher at number 10. Now we're moving on to number 9, and we're kind of sticking with the boot order here, and I actually debated between putting this person even lower on the list, but I feel like had they not wanted to leave the game, they probably would have stayed longer. And here we have Chris Kattan, and Chris Kattan pretty much did nothing in the game. Now I've already talked about before how he probably wasn't in the best state of mind to play the game, both physically and mentally, and he was really struggling a lot while in the house. Obviously we see that during the second eviction, where he literally tells the house to vote him out, and yet they keep him over Mirai, which is sort of crazy when you think about it. Obviously, he ends up quitting the game during the third round. However, I feel like the reason I have him above Mirai and Teddi is that I feel like he had less potential to be an early boot than either of them. Mind you, I don't think he was super well poised to win the game, even if he was like willing to play, but I feel like Chris Kattan at least made it further than those two. He actively stays over Mirai even after people tell him to vote him out. Mind you, that's because Mirai was already the target at that point, and there was literally literally no point keeping Mirai around, but I feel like it was enough to have him slightly higher in the list, and I feel like he probably would have stayed a bit longer had he not quit the game, even if a lot of the reason he would have been evicted is because he wanted to leave the game. So I can't fault him too much for that, but at the end of the day, he pretty much did nothing in the game, and I feel like his state of mind pretty much caused him to do nothing in the game. So because of that, I had to leave him here at number 9. Now we're moving on to number 8, and we're kind of moving into this middle tier now, and I feel like this was very hard for me to parse, as I feel like it consists of a lot of players who actively played hard but made mistakes along the way that caused him to be evicted, or players that were well positioned but did nothing in the game. But at number 8, I decided to go with someone who, again, was well positioned but did nothing, and here we have Lamar Odom. Now, admittedly, he didn't do nothing in the game. I mean, we did see him build some bonds in the house. We know that he's in the Athletes Alliance, and there are people that really liked him and wanted to keep him around. However, I feel like he was very passive in the game. I mean, early on, we see him like not really take the game seriously. Like, it seems like a big reason that he wanted to be in the game was to try to get back with his ex-girlfriend, who was a Kardashian. However, when that didn't come through, he really questioned what the point of even being in the house was. He considered quitting at a point, but he ultimately decided to stick around and make it all the way to the final 5. And that's something to his credit. He does get to the final 5, but I feel like he was very passive along the way. You know, he never really won HOH, which probably was for the best, as again, with him being a professional athlete, he probably would have been a target had he won some of those comps. However, and another thing to his credit is the fact that he wins the game if he gets to the end. More than likely, it's just a matter of if he could get there and win those cons. But by the time he got to the final 5, he was in a pretty bad spot to where he probably would have needed to win out in order to get to the end. But when he was unable to do so, he was promptly evicted as a result. And again, it's sort of tough to consider Lamar's game, as again, he was well positioned throughout a lot of it, and he probably wins if he gets to the end, and he was very well liked. However, he was so passive in the game and didn't really do much to position himself to get towards the end of the game that I can't reward him too highly. So because of that, I had to leave him here at number 8. Now we're moving on to number 7, and we have someone who's pretty similar to Lamar. However, I feel like they were a bit more active in their game, and here we have Cynthia. And it's sort of crazy that Cynthia got all the way to the final 3. However, I feel like she was largely passive in the game. Now, she was a part of Carson's Day 1 alliance. However, I feel like a lot of that was due to their previous relationship, and I feel like through that, she probably would have remained loyal to that group all the way to the end. Mind you, I think she probably loses to Carson if she got to the end with him, so the fact that she wanted to stick with that was probably a misstep on her end. Now, the main reason that allows her to get to the end is through her building a relationship with Todrick. Now, I do think this probably benefited Todrick more than Cynthia, as it ensured that even if the Carson side won HOH, that Todrick wouldn't be put up, more so than Cynthia ensuring her own safety moving forward. But it does sort of ensure her safety by making it so that Carson and Teddy are targeted over her, and moving forward, Cynthia has this in with Todrick that allows her to get relatively deep into the game. Now, aside from that, she doesn't really do that much. Like, I think one of the biggest knocks against her game is the fact that she gets convinced by Todrick to turn against Shanna, someone who is very loyal to her. And obviously, while Carson was the HOH, and it's also a misstep on his end that he falls for Todrick's ploy there, it's still not great that she turns on her own ally there. And like I said, I feel like aside from her relationship with Todrick and sticking with Carson, she doesn't really do that much in the game. She's pretty passive throughout a lot of it, gets to the final 3 in a position to where she probably wins if she wins that final HOH, but with her being so bad at comps, she's not able to do it. She's evicted at the final 3, and like I said, she probably wins if she gets to the end, similar to Lamar. However, it's just a matter of if she could get there, and I feel like her comp ability wasn't strong enough to get her there. Even aside from that, while she does have a relationship with Todrick to where she's the least likely person to be targeted from the Carson side of the house, it's not enough to ensure a spot at the end, and because of that, I'd leave her here at number 7. Now we're moving on to number 6, and this is where things get a little tough, as I feel like these next 2 players were pretty active in the game and probably were playing harder than even some of the people we'll be talking about after them. It's just that through their missteps, they were ultimately caught and targeted. By number 6, I have the person that probably made the more active mistake, in my opinion, even if they made it slightly farther, and here we have Shanna Moakler. And I said that I was pretty impressed by Shanna's early game. She does a very effective job job at sort of playing the middle of the house, you know, like with having these bonds with the Carson side, but also with the Miesha side, and also having her allegiance to Kirkpatrick that allows her to sort of be in this great position early on. However, obviously what causes her to blow up that position is during the week where she wins the veto, and she decides to use the veto and somehow thinks that Miesha wouldn't use that opportunity to put Kirkpatrick on the block, which is sort of a mystery on her end. And we don't really see her do that much to try to manipulate Miesha or Todrick to, you know, put up someone like Todd over Kirkpatrick. And ultimately she uses the veto just hoping that like Kirkpatrick isn't backdoored, which obviously blows up in her face. Kirkpatrick gets backdoored, he gets sent out of the house. Then the week after, she's really the main target in the house. As we see Todrick really lead the charge against her, he is able to turn Cynthia and Carson against her, even though she had already chosen to side with that side of the house, which is pretty bad on her end. However, I think it's also sort of impressive on Todrick's end how he was able to turn them against her. And it's at the point where she needs to win the veto in order to stay in the house, as Carson was willing to put her on the block. However, with it being the final 7, like she seemed to have a good shot of actually getting to at least play in the veto. However, she gets very unlucky with the veto draw, where despite it being the final 7, she's the only person not picked for the veto, and through that she's essentially dead to rights, and I think she gets very unlucky there. I think I'm very impressed by the early game Shanna played, and I know people were really siding with her throughout a lot of the drama with Todrick once the house started to turn against her. However, I feel like she still made a mistake at the end of the day by using the veto to hopefully keep Kirkpatrick off the block. Like, she should have known that Miesha wouldn't have kept Kirkpatrick safe in that end, and I feel like through that she did more actively wrong to blow up her position. However, that good position and her active gameplay is enough to leave her here at number 6. Now we're moving on to number 5, and we have someone I literally just mentioned. It is Kirkpatrick. Now, it's kind of weird because Kirkpatrick was evicted the week before Shanna, and you can fault him to a degree for not trying to get Shanna to not use the veto and sort of talk her out of this risky ploy. However, obviously he thinks it's going to work as well, and it's pretty clear by the end that he cares more about Miesha and Todrick losing than himself winning, which is a knock at the end of the day, and maybe I probably should put him below Shanna, but the reason I have him above Shanna is that I feel like he didn't make as big of a mistake at the end of the day, because while I think they are both involved in this move, I think Shanna was ultimately the one that made the mistake of using the veto, thinking Kirkpatrick would be safe, even though she probably should have known that Kirkpatrick would be put up as the backdoor, as it's the obvious option for Miesha and Todrick to do. And I feel like with Kirkpatrick not making that obvious mistake, I feel like that is something in his favor. And obviously, aside from that, we see him win HOH. I feel like he handles it pretty well for the most part. Now, there is obviously some not so great stuff with the drama he has with Mirai, but I feel like he does a good enough job there of putting up Mirai as a target to not compromise his position as much. Like, I feel like he is actively playing the game as well, actively playing this middle for a lot of the early game, and I had to give him some credit for that. However, at the end of the day, he is still a relatively early boot, and I can't have him too high on the list, so because of that, I have him here at number 5. Now I'm moving on to number 4, and these next two are all kind of weird as well, as again, I feel like they weren't playing as actively as some of the people we were talking about earlier. However, not as passively as people like Lamar or Cynthia. But number 4, we have Carson Kressley, and Carson's sort of weird to talk about because he was sort of the initial leader of his majority group. He builds that day 1 alliance with Cynthia, Teddy, and several others. He also has a pre-game relationship with Todrick, which is something. However, I feel like a problem with him is that while he does have initial control in the game, once he loses that control by losing Teddy and Todrick ultimately siding with the Miesha side of the house, he sort of just gives up, and from that point on just decides to hang out with his friends, like the people he has a pre-game relationship with, and I feel like he doesn't really play that hard. Obviously, I feel like that really comes to fruition during his HOH, where despite Shanna siding with him, he is ultimately convinced by Todrick to turn against her and really wastes his HOH to get rid of someone that probably would have been a number for him moving forward. And for me, that's probably a pretty big mistake on his end, and the reason why I can't have him too high on the list. That, and also the fact that he played pretty passively at the end of the day. But again, I feel like he is someone who was at least more active than Cynthia or Lamar. I feel like he does more with building that early alliance. It's just the fact that he gives up more or less once that alliance falls apart, and through that, I feel like he doesn't really play that actively anymore. He is someone that cares a lot about his out-of-game relationships, and I feel like we really see that during his HOH as well, where he decides to not target Todrick due to their pre-existing relationship and the fact that he made a deal with him, and the fact that he says so loyal build that to the point where he doesn't really care about the game is a knock at the end of the day. But I still feel like he is someone, again, he did build that alliance, and the fact that he probably wins if he gets to the end. And that's enough for me to leave him here at number 4. But again, I probably shouldn't have him too much higher than that. Now we're moving on to number 3. And again, this is another pretty weird person to talk about, and sort of crazy that they got so deep into the game. But number 3, we have Todd Bridges. And I wasn't expecting to put him this high on the list, as again, I feel like he didn't play that well either. He was pretty passive at the end of the day. But the reason I have him this high is that he was so close to winning the game. I mean, while you have people like Lamar and Cynthia who also made it pretty deep into the game in the positions where they probably win against either Todrick or Miesha if they get to the end, I feel like Todd had the most demonstrated comp ability of those 3, to where he did win at HOH and he did come relatively close to winning some of those endgame comps. And for me, that's enough to put him here at number 3 in the list, and the fact that he was close to winning the game through his comp ability, but also the fact that he would beat both Todrick and Miesha if he gets to the end. It's sort of crazy how he got to be perceived as this jury threat at the end of the day. At the end of the day, he didn't play that actively at the end of the day. He was someone who was largely passive, largely sticking with the Todrick and Miesha side of things. He does build that final 4 deal with them, but obviously by the end, he is the biggest jury threat, to where he is taken out at the final 4. But again, he was just so close to winning, and for me, that was enough to leave him here at number 3. Now we're moving on to number 2, and obviously we have the final 2 of the season. And for me, these were definitely the 2 best players of the season. However, there is a clear gap between number 2 and number 1. But number 2, we actually have the winner of the season. We have Miesha Tate. And Miesha is definitely a weird game to talk about, as on one hand, she was one of these people that was playing actively, and I feel like she was very capable in competitions. However, she is someone who I think has a number of issues socially and definitely strategically. So right at the bat, she wins the first HOH. We see her make that deal with Todrick during the HOH to where they wouldn't target each other. But then we see Teddy, try to make a similar deal with Miesha, and obviously she turns it down. And to me, that was probably a mistake. I feel like even if she was planning to target Teddy, she probably should have tried to work around that, as opposed to just saying no right at the bat, or at least consider some of her options more. So I think that's an issue on her end. I feel like she does a decent enough job during her first HOH to build this power structure, build the athletes alliance, and really get Todrick on her side to where she's able to be in control for most of the game. But even then, I feel like I would credit Todrick more for, again, giving that side power by ultimately staying with the athletes over the Carson side of the house. And even then, I feel like she doesn't handle things perfectly. Like, you obviously have Mirai telling people that she would end up on the block as a pawn. Obviously, that's not particularly great. And I feel like Miesha isn't that great socially throughout a lot of the game. And from that point on, she's in the majority for a lot of the game, being side by side by Todrick. But I feel like Todrick is really the one that's guiding her through a lot of the game strategically, to where she makes a number of really questionable decisions that probably would have gotten her in trouble. I already mentioned the fact that she rejected Teddy's deal to not target her, rejecting an opportunity to build a bond with her. But there's also later in the game where we literally see Lamar approach her with the final 2 deal, and she says no. And I feel like that's such a knock as well. She really does pretty bad socially at points, and probably the biggest blunder I would say for her strategically is at the final 7, where obviously Todrick turns Cynthia and Carson against Shanna during the week that Carson is HOH, and Miesha suggests the idea that Carson should put up her and Todrick on the block in order to reduce the odds that Shanna competes in the veto and allow a backdoor to happen. And it's sort of crazy that ends up working out for her, in the sense that Shanna just happens to be the one person not picked for the veto, but it's still a very bad idea for her and Todrick to end up on the block, as again, on 2 ends. One, again, it is the final 7, and you're really banking on Shanna not being picked for the veto when it's the final 7. There's only a 1 in 7 chance of her not being picked, which is very low on itself. I mean, the fact that it does end up working out for her is kind of insane when you think about it. But there's also the idea that Carson could just change his mind, or maybe someone else wins the veto and decides to not use it, and now her and Todrick are stuck on the block where one of them are guaranteed to go home. So the fact that it worked out for her is pretty crazy, but really, the odds are definitely against her, and it's still a pretty bad idea for her and Todrick to be on the block. And it's a good thing that Carson didn't actually do it, and he decided to just put up her and Todd instead. So there's that. And also, I feel like towards the end game, she is sort of someone that has to rely on comps. She wins a lot of these end game comps. Now, mind you, some of them are mentals, and I feel like that's somewhat impressive. But considering the fact that she is a professional athlete competing against a bunch of older adults in their 40s and 50s, obviously the cards are stacked in her favor to win a lot of those physical comps as well. So I feel like through that, her dominance of the game isn't that impressive in the sense that she did rely a lot on her comp ability to get into positions of power to prevent others from really dethroning her. And she is someone, like I said, is pretty bad socially as well. She only wins at the end against Todrick, which is pretty bad on her end. And while she gets that like result of her getting that final 2, I feel like if Cynthia or Todd were able to win out in some of those endgame comps, like she loses the game, which is such a massive knock for me. And I feel like, yes, that while she does beat Todrick at the end, I feel like the stuff that she did to get there just wasn't as impressive as under one person. So because of that, I have to leave her here at number 2. And now at number 1, the person I think played the best game on Celebrity Big Brother 3 for me is Todrick Hall, and it's not even close really. I feel like he clearly demonstrated himself as the best player of the season, even though I understand why he lost. Now, early on, he is sort of in this great position where he has his pre-existing relationship with Carson to where he's welcomed to his Day 1 alliance, but he also does good work building a bond with Miesha, like through the first HOH and making that deal with her, and he has a choice. He could either go with the Carson side of things or he could go with the Miesha side of things. Now, obviously, he chooses the Miesha side of things, which ultimately allows that side of the house to control the rest of the game. And because of his pre-existing relationship with Carson, Carson is never really willing to turn on him. Now, granted, some of that is due to Carson's unwillingness to play the game self-interestedly. However, I think Todrick also, like through that bond, like he's able to never touch the block the entire season. It's really impressive to me how he's able to navigate through the game. Obviously, the week where Carson wins HOH, that probably should have been a week in which the Carson side is able to take a shot at either Todrick or Miesha, but instead Todrick is able to convince both him and Cynthia to turn against Shanna, someone who was more loyal to that side of the house than to his side of the house, and they're able to backdoor her through that way. Mind you, they get a bit lucky in that circumstance, but whatever. And like I said, from the rest of the way, he's pretty much in the driver's seat for a lot of the game, and I feel like I give more credit to Todrick for a lot of the moves that him and Miesha make than to Miesha, and through that he's able to get to the final 2, where obviously he loses against Miesha, and really he loses against everyone. So like I said, I feel like he did a great job at navigating the game strategically, and I feel like he is the best player this season. But like I said, I understand why he lost, and that's because his jury management was abysmal. I mean, if we're going all the way back to week 1, I mean, there's the fact that he tells Teddy about his flip, and the way he explains himself and the way he is unable to own up to his game to Teddy as he's sending her out is a big reason that she doesn't vote for him. Later on, we see him talk to Kirkpatrick as he's on his way out, and he really berates Kirkpatrick. He calls him a bad father at one point, really burns him to the point where Kirkpatrick never votes for him. And later on, we see that through Shanna as well, through him sort of body shaming Shanna, really turning that into an ugly situation. But he is able to turn the house against Shanna by the expense of getting Shanna's jury vote. And we see this over and over again where he does burn people along the way to the point where by the end, he doesn't win against anyone. And, you know, that could partly explain why he's able to get to the end, but I think that's also because he has a tight bond with Miesha to where Miesha was always going to take him to the end no matter what. And obviously, Miesha is able to win against him in a near unanimous jury vote. And I understand why Todrick lost the jury vote at the end of the day, and a lot of that is through his own actions, but you can't deny the control that he had in the game, the way he was able to maneuver through the game and position himself to get to the end of the game, the way he was able to stay in control for so much of the game as well, is a big reason that I have him here as the best player from Celebrity Big Brother 3. And there we go, that will do it for this video, along with my coverage of Celebrity Big Brother 3. If you like this content, be sure to like and subscribe, it really helps out the channel. And moving forward, I will be covering other shows. I'm still covering Big Brother Canada, that's on at this point. I'm covering Australian Survivor, which is a lot of fun. And I'm going to be covering Survivor 42 once that starts, so stay tuned for all that. There's a lot of stuff coming your way, so stay tuned for that. But for now, that is the video. See ya.